knowing what needs help first. It's Financial Triage. The Military Money Show is sponsored by Charles Schwab. Since 1973, Charles Schwab has been helping people achieve better financial outcomes for themselves and their families. You can learn more about Charles Schwab and the work they do at schwab.com. Hey, welcome to the Military Money Show, where I help the military community make, save, and invest money wisely. I'm your host, Lacey Langford, the military money expert. If we aren't mindful of them, finances can get us frazzled. If something's off with your money, you probably already know it. You know you have to do something, but what is that something? Where do you start? My guest, Eric Brotman, is here to help us know where to go first with a little financial triage. Eric is a CFP with over 27 years of experience and the CEO of BFG Financial Advisors. He believes financial literacy is the key to well-being. He's a personal finance author and the host of Don't Retire, Graduate podcast. Eric's approachable and actionable financial advice has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Yahoo Finance, to name a few. Eric shares his advice on doing financial triage to work on your financial well-being, retirement, debt, and more. He also shares steps you can take to gain control of your debt and strategies to build wealth and work towards the retirement you want. Here is my chat with Eric. Hey, Eric, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Lacey. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to talk about this subject because I feel like a lot of people need it, and it's a good reminder for everyone. I want to start off with the basics because people hear this terminology. What is financial literacy, and why is it important to somebody's well-being?
Financial literacy is essentially a basic level of understanding of how finance works. And that can be as simple as knowing how to balance a checkbook or how to handle a credit card or other types of basic financial transactions, how to understand how interest works, whether it's interest you're earning or interest you're paying, and just basic financial concepts, understanding what a 401k is or what a thrift savings plan is or how a match works or what a vesting schedule means. You know, people are faced with big financial decisions pretty much from the time they take their first job, and even sometimes before that, if there's education, lending, or other things. So it's important to have basic financial literacy. Without that, it's incredibly difficult to make good decisions that are informed.
For a lot of people, they didn't grow up with financial literacy, those things being taught to them. And so I can imagine, and I've seen this as a coach, I've seen the look in people's eyes when you start to give them financial literacy and they realize that there is all of those things that you just mentioned, interest rates, understanding
Right.
all of these concepts and terminology, I think can also be fearful for people. What do you say to them about starting that journey and not getting overwhelmed and just not beating themselves up?
Well, I think the first thing is that they're not alone. None of us grew up with financial literacy. The things we learn about money as kids usually are from our parents, and often they're wrong. So, you know, if you grow up in a house where you watch your parents argue about money or struggle with money, that creates one type of narrative that you take with you. Or if one of them is a spender and one of them is a saver and there's conflict, or if both of them are spenders and it creates issues, or if you're in one of those families where it's, you know, turn the light off as soon as you leave the room because the electric meter's running, or, you know, everybody's different. So I think first it's important for people to understand that they're not alone, and it's not like they weren't paying attention in school when this was taught. It's not taught in school. And so it's not like one of us daydreamed through something important and now we're playing catch up. We all have to do this on our own. And so I think the best way to start is either to find a coach or in some cases even a financial therapist or a financial planner or advisor, or to use online financial literacy courses, things that are really high impact but low intensity, things that you can learn an awful lot but not feel stressed by. And that allows you to begin the learning process, hopefully in a pretty safe way, where you can ask questions and don't feel like you're asking sort of the dumb question, because none of us got this education growing up.
Yes, that is so true. The best piece of advice I ever, in the finance world as a professional, I was doing my CFP program at Duke, and I remember one of the professors said, finance is a humbling profession. You're not always going to know the answer. And I go back to that all of the time to say, hey, sometimes you need a refresher. Sometimes you need to just double check the terminology, and I think that goes for everyone. So there's a whole slew of things you could know about money from one end to the other, if it's investments or budgeting, whatever it is, because I've also met big advisors that don't know some basic budgeting concept very well, because that's not the world that they walk in every day. And so they might have to study up a little bit more than maybe I would if we were going to have a discussion about budgeting. So I think that, keep it in perspective, I think, is important.
Well, none of us know everything, first and foremost. And like you, I did the CFP education, and mine was 23 years ago when I did the CFP. So the program has changed somewhat over a quarter century, for crying out loud. But it's important to know what you know and to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And to know where to find what you don't know. It's okay to not know something off the top of your head. I still don't know all the rules and regs and limits, and it's impossible. They change, and every state is different, and every situation is different. So instead of trying to devote this to rote memory, make sure you understand the concepts and where to find the current answer, because things are indexed. And what is the wage base for Social Security, or what is the limit for a health savings account? Or these things change at least once a year. And to try and memorize them all, I assure you that what I learned in 1998 is now useless in terms of those limits. So it's better to just acknowledge that it doesn't have to roll off the tip of your tongue. You just have to know where to find it. And then more importantly, how do you apply it?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not just about knowing it. It's what you're going to do with it. It's not, at some point you have to take action.
Well, in the financial world, it's important to, I think, be right more often than you're not right. Unlike, say, meteorology, when you can be wrong all of the time and still, maintain your employment. And I apologize to my friends who are meteorologists, but in our world, it's real important to acknowledge that we can't possibly know what's coming. And that could be world events, it could be economic events, it could be inflation or interest rates or stock market returns. It is impossible to know what's coming. It is really important also to understand that even if you know what you're doing, even for whether it's a consumer or a professional, even if you really know your stuff, you can't predict the future, and you have your own behavioral biases that play a bigger role, frankly, in the outcome sometimes than the math. I mean, it is real tough. Doing your own financial plan is a little bit like editing your own manuscript. It's extremely difficult. And the reason it's difficult is because your brain, when you read your manuscript, if you're writing something, your brain sees what it thinks you meant to write, even if that's not what was there. And somebody else reading it is going to catch a punctuation issue or a spelling issue or the fact that you juxtaposed words or something. Finance is very much the same way. We all have blind spots. And we all get more emotional potentially about our own money than about something that's more conceptual, whether it's for our business or for a client or for our next door neighbor. So understanding what some of those biases are and how we make decisions. And then, the best financial advisors to me are those who have financial advisors. My wife and I sit down with a financial advisor, not because I'm not capable and I don't know what I'm doing, but because I have to put on my husband hat instead of my planner hat, and I have to make sure that we're having a human conversation about our family instead of it sounding like a lecture from me.
Yeah, sometimes a neutral third party is very helpful when it comes to money because they don't have that history of those discussions and frustrations, and couples especially, they have different wants and needs, and balancing that sometimes can be hard if you're trying to manage the money plus the relationship.
Well, when you marry somebody, you're marrying their whole family. So your in-laws, you're choosing them in addition to your spouse. Well, you know this.
Yes.
But the same thing's true with the financial history. And I don't just mean necessarily you're choosing to inherit in-laws with debt or in-laws who are going to leave an inheritance. I don't mean quantitatively. I mean that your spouse or future spouse grew up learning the wrong lessons about money just like you did, but you learned different wrong lessons. So you suddenly have not only your own, I'll use the term baggage loosely, but your own misunderstandings about finance from your own growing up. But now you have to marry that with your spouse's, and there's a lot of potential pitfalls there, and it really is helpful to work through that, whether it's therapy or coaching or advising or some combination.
Yeah, because you have your normal and they have their normal. And I've seen this in the coaching that I do. I've given this example before, but I had somebody that or I know somebody that they would only pay a little bit of their bill at a time, and they would do it in person. So instead of, even if they had the cash to pay their entire electrical bill, they would only go pay half of it. And then they would go to the cell phone place and pay half of it. And that was just the way they grew up. That's the way their parents did, is because money was so tight that they always were scared to give away all their cash. And so they would just keep doing the circle every few days of going to pay bills. And so when you're married, that's difficult to, one, if that is your spouse that's choosing to pay the bills that way, to not start a fight by saying, hey, that's really messed up the way you're doing it, because that is their normal, and you're saying that the way they're doing things is wrong. And so it's definitely a balancing act. Even as a financial professional, it's hard sometimes to say that to somebody, be like, look, there's a better way to do this.
Well, and Lacey, I hadn't heard of that exact scenario before, but I do know lots of couples where one spouse is used to paying a bill the day it arrives, and one spouse is used to paying a bill the day it's due.
Yes.
And that could be a 21-day gap or 30-day gap or whatever. And if you're used to paying bills the day they arrive, but you're not the one paying the bills in the household, and you see a stack of bills on the kitchen counter, so to speak, and today it tends to be more emails than stacks of bills, but the whole point is, if you see that backlog, it'll cause you incredible stress, not because it's late, not because it's not going to be paid and paid in full and paid correctly, but because it's not being paid the way you thought it should be. And the same thing's true in reverse. If you're the person who's used to saying, well, it's not due for 3 weeks, why in the world would we send money now if we can hold it for the next 3 weeks? Which I would argue, at the interest rates we're at now, it really doesn't matter. But nonetheless, if somebody's used to paying them in a different way, it causes conflict, it causes stress, and you have to have a balancing act. And you really, I think sometimes it's about defining roles. Who's going to handle this? And now get out of their way. It doesn't matter which spouse it is. It can be collaborative, but come up with, this is the way we're going to do it. If it doesn't work well, we'll adjust.
Yeah. I come from an old school family where you don't pay the bill until right before it's due, because that money stays in your account. It doesn't go in their account. So that's when interest rates were much higher. So it was a different story, but that was always, you didn't pay them until it got close to time.
See, and you and I would have conflict because I want to pay it, check that box, move it to the side, file it away, and not think about it anymore as soon as it arrives.
Yes.
So, unless there's some real compelling reason not to, I want to do it that way. And you're not wrong, and I'm not wrong.
Right.
They're just different.
Yeah, it's just how you conduct business.
Correct.
Well, so people are learning financial literacy and growing. I think people hear that they should expand their knowledge in financial literacy and work towards retirement. But what is retirement? Because I feel like there's a version of it, what it used to be for maybe my parents, my grandparents, versus what retirement is now. Because I think when I talk to my parents about it, my retirement will look completely different, because I'm also doing what I love. It doesn't feel like a lot of work. So I think the future will be different for me. So what is retirement about these days?
That is a spectacular question. I love that question, because there is also no right answer, but I will give you my philosophy. Retirement historically is the absence of work. It's when you no longer are gainfully employed in any way. To me, retirement is that moment where you have financial independence or financial freedom, where work is optional. So to me, it's not the absence of work, it's the absence of needing to work, which I think is a completely different mindset. Historically, retirement meant that you spent 30 or 40 years at a company. Our grandparents spent 40 years at a company. They got a gold watch and a party, and then they left, and they were 65, and they didn't do anything necessarily, and they were dead at 72. Well, today, people want to retire at 55 from full-time employment. They could live to be 107. You better figure out what you're going to do for a third, if not a half of your life. So to me, retirement's about having enough money that you're only doing what you feel like doing from a work perspective. And, you said it yourself. It doesn't feel like a lot of work. I love what I do. Well, me too. I want to do this forever, for as long as I'm useful and happy and having fun with it and enjoying what I do. But there's still a moment where if you're working because you have to make a mortgage payment, it's different than if you're working because it creates abundance for you and a purpose and a mission. So having a reason to get out of bed every morning, and it doesn't have to be for money if you don't need it, but that matters whether you're 80 or 40. It really does. So retirement, if you look at the word retire, break it down, do the definition of retire. To retire is to withdraw or disappear. I don't want to do that.
Me either.
In fact, in the UK, retiring is going to sleep. It means I'm going to bed. I'm going to retire for the evening. Well, I'm not ready to take a dirt nap. I would like to have another whole phase of my life. So the book that I wrote is called Don't Retire, Graduate. And the idea is that we should celebrate this moment rather than retreating from it. We should move towards something. We should consider it the moment where we have the most wisdom, the most experience, the most to offer. And in a lot of cases, the most time to offer it in the way that it's needed. Because if you're 65 or 70 years old, first of all, if you're still at the top of your game, and there's no reason why you wouldn't be, you have a lot to offer. Even if it's mentoring and coaching or volunteering, it doesn't necessarily have to be for a paycheck. But beyond that, in most cultures, we revere our elders. And in the United States, we put our elders out to pasture. That's an awful way to spend what could be a third of our lives and half our adult lives. I'll pass.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, that it doesn't necessarily just have to be about work, that you could pursue passions or do other things in that time afterwards. It made me think of my mom and my grandma. My grandma is 94, and her and my mom still volunteer together at Church of the Food Pantry. And I always think that must be so odd for other people that show up to receive a bag. Like, this is, my mom and my grandma. And sometimes I go visit them. So there's 3 generations in the food pantry. But I don't do it nearly as much as my mom, my grandma. So full disclosure, I don't want to take credit for their work. But that's something they do, that they find purpose in. They love helping out. It's a great thing for them to do together. And they're out of the house. And so it's, I think, to each their own. I like that you're saying graduate.
Yeah. So are your mom and your grandma retired? I don't know.
No, I feel like my mom and my grandma's slowing down a little bit, but I feel like my mom is busier than ever. If she's actually busier than me. It's harder for me to catch her than it is for her to catch me, because I'm normally here at my house. She's on the go.
Well, then whether they're retired or not by definition is irrelevant. What they are is engaged and enthusiastic and aspiring to things and making a difference. And that's so much more important. The concept of retirement is one that's imposed by various rules or restrictions based on what you do for a living or based on government. The age at which you can collect Social Security, or in some industries, it's forced retirement. And some companies have forced retirement still to this day, where you can't be a principal or a partner beyond a certain age, or airline pilots have an age where they need to retire because presumably it would make you uncomfortable if your grandma was flying commercial airlines. But my point is that some of it is imposed to us or done to us, not necessarily for us. Retirement was created in the 1800s. This idea of retirement, and maybe it's before that, but there was a guy named Otto von Bismarck who came up with this idea, and it was a way to get rid of the older people so somebody more useful could come in and do the work. And he basically said, and I'm misquoting, but it's a paraphrase, that people should be satisfied with the retirement they are cast into. It's like a punishment.
Yeah, I was going to say the word cast there is.
Well, and I don't know if cast was the word, but subjected to or coerced into, or whatever word you want. It's being done to you, not for you.
Right.
And we're not receptive to that. I don't want to be told what I must do because I've hit a certain birthday. I love being told what I'm allowed to do, especially when I was 21. But there's certain things you're allowed to do at certain ages, and I'm turning 50 this year. There's your full disclosure. And so I get catch-up provisions on various retirement plans. That was exciting to me. I'm like, yes, I've arrived.
Yeah.
The rest of being 50, I don't know how I feel about yet. Ask me this winter.
That is a good point, though, about you turning 50 and now there's new financial literacy or situations with money that you're dealing with. And so it just evolves over time. And that you're right. You aren't just retiring from, life and money management, all of these things. You're graduating maybe to a new phase or to a new experience or new thing that you want to do. So I like that it's not as this hard stop.
No, I don't know. I would be bored out of my mind. And my wife has said to me more than once, don't ever just putter around this house. Because there are putterers. There are people who just sort of wander around. They don't even get dressed.
Yes.
They sleep till 10 o'clock. They don't get dressed. That's not how I want to spend a meaningful chunk of my life. It's great to take a day off or a week off or have vacations. Work doesn't have to be a grind. If you're financially independent, work can be what you want it to be. It can be 3 days a week. It can be half days. It can be 6 months of the year.
Yes.
It can be project-based. I'm going to work with this client for 3 months, then I'm going to take a month off and go to the beach. It can be anything you want if you've reached financial independence. And it's incredibly important to start with financial literacy, to learn the basics, then to do some financial planning, whether it's on your own or with an advisor or with a team of people, so that you can reach financial independence. It's very tough to do it out of order. Very few people are financially independent without being financially literate unless they're heirs to someone, if they're inheriting a ton of money. And even then, those are folks who often blow the money, really blow the money.
So there's talking about trust fund babies. Yes, you're right. They don't know what to do. They need somebody to guide them. If they don't have that guide, then they're making poor decisions because you're right, they're not financially literate.
Well, and they're not prepared for those kinds of things. They're not prepared to be targets. If you're lottery winners, people with sudden wealth, there's a reason why a lottery winner would choose to be anonymous. And you think to yourself, well, no, I want to tell everybody, a front page of the paper, and you don't, because suddenly, first of all, everybody's after you. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't wait till that guy rear ends me on the highway. You know what I mean? Or, hey, I need a new washer and dryer. Can you help a friend?
Yep.
And that stuff happens, and the pressure, and then you're in a position where you don't know, are these people friends because they enjoy me, or are they friends because they're part of my entourage and they're leeching onto the fact that I'm buying this round of drinks all the time?
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad. And people who have sudden wealth often run out of money. A lot of times they wind up owing money to the IRS because they don't understand the tax ramifications of what's happening. And they tend to be sad. Some of them become reclusive. Like, you would think money would solve things, and it can solve certain challenges, certain problems, no question. But by itself, it's just a tool. It's a means to an end. It's not the ends for itself.
I always say that if I won the lottery, my family won't even know. Like, I would keep it so under wraps that nobody would know, because you're right. It just, then you don't know who's real and authentic in your life. There's just so many problems that come with it. I see that's why even people that don't win the lottery, people that have built their wealth, why they're very private about it, why they drive a car that's very low maintenance, a used vehicle versus going and getting, a new Mercedes, is because they don't want that in their life. They want to live a normal life where people treat them like they would somebody else, and be able to help people privately. I think a lot of people enjoy that versus the pressure that comes with it. I want to switch. Oh, go ahead.
No, I said agreed. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's no fun if more. What do they say? More money, more problems. Like that's a quote for a reason.
Well, and you want to grow into it.
Yeah.
If you're, it's been said that to be young and broke is an inconvenience, but to be old and broke is a tragedy. Yeah. The reality is, if you have more money in your 30s than you did in your 20s, and more in your 40s than you do in your 30s, and you're doing this in a, if not linear, hopefully a geometric and exponential way where you're growing some wealth over time, you're learning how to handle it a little bit at a time. It's one of the reasons why when we work with our clients' attorneys and we do estate planning, a lot of times we talk about how to leave money to your children if that's what you're going to do, and not to leave it all lump sum. to leave it in trust and to give them access to it for certain reasons or at certain ages, so they don't become those trust babies, so it doesn't ruin their lives. I mean, because you can really ruin somebody.
The whole thing that we're talking about here is that you have to have that basic literacy, no matter if you make millions of dollars, if it's given to you or you've busted your butt to get to it, that you need to have these basic understanding of when it's going right, so you'll understand when it's going wrong.
Well, and it doesn't even have to be a giant wealth situation. It could just be when you go to buy your first home.
Right.
Buying your first home is a massive responsibility and undertaking. And, we saw the ramifications of people being talked into buying homes in 2006 and 2007, right before the recession hit the real estate market. And these were folks who, in some cases, couldn't qualify to get a Discover card.
Yeah.
But they were doing 100% or more financing on a house. It was predatory in lots of different ways. And there are lots of reasons for it we don't have to get into. But the bottom line is, when you buy your first home, it's a major financial decision. Your mortgage amount, what you're paying in the mortgage, is not the same as what you pay in rent. Because the costs, and the costs from owning a home, when the roof leaks, you need a roof. When something breaks, you need to pay to fix it. It's different than when you rent an apartment. So yes, there might be a tax break on your interest, but the responsibilities to take care of everything are enormous. Just to furnish it, to improve it, is a big deal. And you're making a decision that's not easy to get out of. If you rent an apartment and you decide you hate it, leave. And if you're on the hook for a few months extra rent, you'll lick your wounds and move on. But if you buy a house and decide you don't want it, the cost to sell is enormous, and the closing and the title and all the things people don't understand. So even straightforward type things, when you've done it 4 times, you feel really adept at it. But buying a first car, buying a first home, getting married, and combining, how do we do this with his, hers, mine, and ours, and our bank accounts, and what should be joined, and how do we deal with beneficiaries, and becoming parents for the first time, is an enormously expensive proposition, and there's lots of things you don't think about. And that's not to scare people or to talk them out of it. It just means that financial literacy is all of your life decisions. Accepting a new job. How many times would somebody get offered a job and the salary's higher, and so they assume it must be better? Well, the salary might be higher, but the benefit package isn't as good, and you're going to pay 3 times as much for health insurance, or there's going to be other where you're not going to vest in your retirement plan, and you're going to give some money up, or
longer hours.
Well, there are lots of different details. Some of them are, do you have as much time off or whatever, but some of it is truly quantifiable too. And you need basic financial literacy just to compare 2 job offers, or 2 student loan offers, or 2 mortgage offers. Or how do you know, if you're going to hire a financial advisor, whether he or she is good, is competent, if you are a good match? What do you ask? You talked about Mary J. Blige not wanting to ask a question. You've got to not only know what questions to ask, but maybe what answers to listen for.
Yeah.
Because it's not enough to ask a question. I could ask you how a carburetor works, and you could tell me. I would not know what you said 3 minutes later, and I would not be able to articulate that. I just wouldn't. But to understand how a certificate or deposit works, I could explain to you. That would be something that would be in my wheelhouse. So I think people need to have enough knowledge to know where their knowledge ends and where they might need some expert help, whether it's on taxes or legal or financial, but also to know what questions to ask, what answers to think about and listen for, and how to have checks and balances on that. So you're not being taken advantage of or robbed. How do you avoid those kinds of things? It's important, and that's basic financial literacy. Ultimately, even choosing a financial advisor and saying, I want you to handle this, still requires financial literacy just to hire someone to outsource it.
Yes. In terminology, I think sometimes scares people away because, in any industry, people have their lingo. And when it comes to money, I think if you use certain words, it just makes people all of a sudden kind of retreat. I'm that way, though. My father-in-law is super smart, an engineer. And when he talks about cars and stuff, I'm like, I don't even know what you said. I don't even know what we're talking about. Are we still talking about cars? And I always make a joke. If he's trying to explain something to me, I'll say, I need you to dumb that down. I don't even know the word you used. And could you point to it on the car? Because I don't know even the area of the vehicle we're talking about. And so I
Right,
always say
right.
that is, okay, hey, I don't understand that word and I need you to show it to me. I need you to show me how this works. And that usually is the way that I learn. I think too, like figuring out what works for you, and humor always helps when I do that. I'll say that to other financial advisors too. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, it's much easier, though, to demonstrate something physical than something
Yes, this is true.
intangible. Demonstrating how a fan belt works is different than demonstrating how an exchange traded fund works.
Yes, that's so
A-
true.
And so even though you could spell it out, you could draw. Like I like to do things with pictures. I do a lot of drawing, and I draw with stick figures. I'm no artist, but I could explain the difference between a laddered bond strategy and a total return bond fund.
Mm.
And I do it because I compare a chocolate chip cookie to pea pods, and people
Mm.
immediately get it. And it's a way to understand a bond strategy. And it's relatable, and it's, oh, now I get it. That now makes sense to me.
Yeah. I think that's
Um,
a really good point. And that shows how what a great advisor you are, that you're making sure people digest it in the way that they understand. And if that requires a picture or an
right,
analogy or
right.
whatever it is, I think that's great.
We don't need our clients to be financial experts, but we need them to have enough acumen to be in the conversation and not just to abdicate responsibility and say, go for it, do whatever you want. Because even though we could, ultimately, I think those conversations, not only with our clients, but with their children or grandchildren or significant others or whatever the relationships are, it matters. It's one thing for you to say, I got a terrific plan, but if you don't share that with your kids and now you're asking them to take over certain responsibilities if you get sick or you die, make sure they're ready. Have conversations in advance with them. So we do family summits. We'll get 2 and 3 generations together, and we don't have to quantify. I don't care how much money you have. People are always embarrassed about money. They're either embarrassed because they have so much that it feels silly, or they're embarrassed because they think they should be worth more than they are. It doesn't matter how much you have.
Yeah.
You know, in my book, I quote philosophers like Chris Rock, who I thought was a terrific philosopher. And Chris said, if Bill Gates woke up tomorrow with Oprah's net worth, he'd want to jump out a window.
That's a really, oh, I didn't know he said that. That's actually a really good point. You're right.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
So, if your neighbor has more money than you, are you poor? No. If your neighbor has less money than you, are you rich? No. But there's such a comparison thing that happens, and people are embarrassed. And, we run into people who are like, just don't tell our kids how much money we have. And of course, we won't. We'll respect that. There's no reason for them to know necessarily.
Right.
But kids want to know, are we going to be responsible for paying some of mom and dad's bills?
Yeah.
Because that's a real thing. We sometimes work, if we have good communication with a family, a lot of times it means using multiple generations to do certain planning. It might be tax planning. It might be skipping those rotten kids of yours and giving money to your perfect grandchildren. I mean, it could be any number of things. It could also be, hey, mom and dad are going to have an issue if one of them gets sick. They are not going to be in a position to afford, for example, long-term care. But one of their kids might be in a totally different situation and can do that for them, which ultimately might protect him or herself
Yeah.
from feeling like, oh my gosh, mom needs assisted living and doesn't have the money for it. Now I either have to pay the bill or she has to be in a facility I don't want her in.
Yeah. It's
So it's a complicated thing, but because we're living longer, folks, and I don't know how old you are, and I know better than to ask, but folks who are Gen Xers, like myself, we've got parents in their 80s and kids in their teens simultaneously, and we're thinking about tuition, but we're also thinking about elder care, and we're thinking about working ourselves 50, 60, 70 hours a week and wanting to be financially independent ourselves. And it's a lot. And so if you have resources, coaching resources, planning resources, who can bring all of that together, start with a family tree and some inventory. And it doesn't have to be quantified. Just understand who's responsible. Know that if you have 3 siblings and your parents have named you to handle their medical affairs if they can't speak for themselves, make sure all the kids know that and know why. Well, it's because you're a nurse, or it's because you're local and your brother's in Singapore. Like, some of it is just, it's okay, but don't let it be a surprise.
yes. Most people
So,
don't like surprises.
especially under duress.
Yes.
Nobody wants to hear Nobody wants to suddenly be cast into an awkward situation when there's a tragedy, because what you want to be able to do is mourn and or celebrate someone's life, or do the things that are going to help everyone heal without then throwing this kind of stuff into the mix. And it makes a difference, a huge difference.
Switching gears for a second, thinking about this, building your financial literacy, working towards retirement or whatever you see that as, graduating. What about people that have debt? Let's talk about the financial triage. How can people work towards the future if they have a lot of debt right now?
There are 3 chapters in the book dedicated to debt relief. And it begins with taking inventory, figuring out where you are, understanding what the interest rates are and the tax implications and minimum payments versus current payments, figuring out what your cash flow is. Are you making more than you spend, or are you spending more than you make? Because if you're spending more than you make, you cannot solve a debt problem. It's like getting out of a hole by digging deeper. So the first thing you have to do is figure that out. Do you have positive cash flow? If you don't, we have to solve that. That means you either need more income, a side hustle, a second job, a raise, etc., or you need lower expenses. And that comes down to some budgeting, or it comes down to some decision making. Once you have positive cash flow, then you have to figure out, now we've shored up the for a business, it would be a profit and loss statement or an income statement. It's what's coming in and what's going out. Now we have to do the same thing for your balance sheet, your net worth. What is your statement of worth? And if that's negative, or if it's lower than you want it to be, how are we going to solve that? How are we going to take this positive cash flow to solve that hole? Some of it can be, if you own a home, it could be refinancing existing debts. It could be lines of credit. It could be using collateral that you have. Collateral can be life insurance. It can be a securities portfolio. It can be real estate. If you're really just starting out and what you have are student loans and you're upside down, then it comes to, what is the strategy for getting out of debt? How do we order the debts? Which ones should we pay extra towards? And we've seen it all. I've seen folks who have $60,000 in credit card debt and are making excess payments to their 3.5% mortgage instead of paying down their credit card debt, because the mortgage is bigger and they feel like psychologically it's better to own their home.
Yeah.
Financially, you can disprove that 7 different ways, but psychology is powerful about that. So you really have to take a full approach and a full look at it. Likewise, we see people who are trying to get out of debt by putting an extra $50 or $100 toward 6 different debts every month. And while that will make a difference, it's not strategic, because one of those debts might be at 13% and one of them is at 4%. Well, if you understand how interest compounds, you wouldn't put extra money, toward a low rate debt if you have higher rate debt outstanding. So you begin with cash flow, then you take inventory of the debts, then you order them, you structure them. And we published a workbook with all of these steps one by one for folks with debt who want to work on that. But there is a definite strategy to which debt to pay off and how long it takes. And you can save foolish amounts of money, crazy amounts of money in interest just by having a strategy behind your debts, even if you don't put an extra dollar toward them. This doesn't have to be a windfall. It could be that taking the same $800 a month toward your student loans could be worked out a different way. And by putting the same $800 toward the loans in a different way, you wind up cutting 4 years off of your payments. That's big.
Yeah.
So, and then there's some creative strategies that we talk about, things like intrafamily loans, which for some families are great and for other families are a disaster. So
I was going to say that might be a hot button issue.
But there are some families who have that kind of situation where you've got, mom or dad have a significant amount of money in a CD paying 0.25%, and you can pay them 4% and pay off some debt, and they wind up with extra income. I mean, there's ways where everybody can win, and it's a legitimate transaction. The issue is that if you renege on it and you don't make your payment, are they really going to sue you? Hopefully that's not the kind of family you're in. But for some families it's an option, for others it's not. But there are different ways to get out of debt, and they're all quantifiable, and you can work through a plan and do that. I think it doesn't even take all that long. You just have to know what your interest rates are, what your minimum payments are, and then if it's a credit card issue, you got to stop using the cards that are compounding, because you can't get out of a hole by digging. It's just not going to work.
What about for people right now that things are tight?
Hmm.
COVID has created craziness for people financially. And, just not knowing what's going to happen next, I think is very difficult for people. Some people have gotten a little bit of stimulus money. How can they stay away from going into more debt? Is it just being aware of what's going on, having a clearer picture so they can still work towards that retirement in their future?
Some of it's being aware. Some of it is having a moat around your castle. And what I mean by that is you don't want to put every dollar you have toward debt necessarily or towards long-term savings. You need to have an emergency fund or an opportunity fund. You need to have a basic savings account. It doesn't, and it's going to be based on your lifestyle. But there are things you can insure against and things you can't insure against. And so when you do risk management planning for a family, the things you can't insure against most of the times are things like periods of unemployment. That can be extremely disruptive, or certainly a pandemic is something we hadn't really thought of and had a plan for. I guess some people did. But if you're really tight, the key is going to be to start paying yourself first. Come up with a way to figure out how to save, whether it's 3% or 5% or 8% or whatever that is, in a place that you can get to it if you suddenly need 4 tires or a washer and dryer, so that you're not on the cusp of using MasterCard. But figure out what that is and make sure you do that automatically every month or every paycheck. You can split your direct deposits on a paycheck to put $50 a check into a different account. That's still your money. It's still cash. It's not at risk, but it's also not, it doesn't have ATM access. You're not going to just decide to hit the ATM and go blow it. It's a different level of difficulty to get to your money. It might still just mean going online and doing a transfer. Like, you want to have access to it, but you don't want it to be so easy. You want it to be segregated a little bit.
Where is the balance between paying yourself, making sure that you have the money for emergencies and opportunities? I love that you say that. I tell people that all the time, that it's not just about emergencies, that there's opportunities you're going to want to go after in life. But having this balance between that savings and paying down debt, because at some point, if you are saving a bunch and you have, a credit card that's 20%, you're losing money in that spread.
If you have adverse consumer debt, that really does come first. It has to. It doesn't make sense to stockpile money at 0% while you're paying 20% on a Visa. So that really does have to come first. But certain other things maybe don't have to. So, for example, if you've got a home equity line of credit or you have some other debt that's hanging out there that's bugging you, but it's not at an adverse rate, you don't have to put every dollar towards it. It's good to make sure that you have other pockets to dip into when you need to. So some of it is that. Some of it is also things like if you're working for an employer and you have a match on a 401k or 403b or some kind of retirement plan, if you don't put in at least enough money to get the match, you're walking away from a tax-deferred raise. So sometimes that will even supersede some of the debt reduction, depending on all the factors and all the different things. Sometimes it still makes sense to pay yourself first, simply because you're going to get 50 or 100% immediately because of the fact that there's a match on it, and that's better than the interest rate on the credit card.
Yeah.
And we don't always think of it that way. But on a macro level, when you look at everything from 30,000 feet, it's a lot easier than when you look at it just at one statement or one account or one issue in a vacuum.
I like it. Well, I could just keep asking you questions after questions. This is a really great subject. I'm definitely going to have you back to talk deeper about it. But I want to ask you before we go a couple of quick random questions that I ask everyone. First
Sure.
of all, what is one resource or tool that you use that makes your life or business easier?
A tool that I use to make my life or business easier? Well, for me, it's my CRM. It's Salesforce. It organizes my whole life. Everything's in that. So I know exactly where I need to be and when I need to be there. And then I have, my team here accesses it and tells me where to go. They tell me what to do and I do it. They say
Right
you have an interview with Lacey, go to your room. Oh, okay.
I think a hub of organization is very helpful,
Yeah.
To manage things. All right. What is your favorite book right now or your favorite book of all time?
Favorite book of all time is The Catcher in the Rye. It was the book that probably had the most impact on me as a young person. And the reason for that, and there's a quote in that book that I still use on my social media profiles, my personal profiles, that says the mark of an immature man is that he wants to die nobly for a cause. The mark of a mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one. And I have lived my life with that in mind, despite the fact I read that book probably in middle school and didn't understand it. So that book had a major influence on me. So that one definitely counts. And I love to read. I read all the classics. I was an English major, so I do a lot of reading and read the classics, and that gives me a lot of peace. So yeah. But that would be the number one.
Well, I'll be sure to put a link to that in the show notes for everybody. That's the first time it's ever been recommended on the show, so that's a good one. It's profane. You have to decide that that's what you want. It is a teenage angst book that I read as a kid, and the main character in the book, and it's a little on the depressing side too, but I just loved that advice, and it stuck with me. Yeah. Well, it will be an option for everybody. Well, now it is time for my favorite part of the podcast, which is game time. And today we are going to be playing random trivia. Are you ready?
Ooh, I am as ready as I'm going to get.
Yes. I'm going to give you 3 questions, and they're multiple choice, and you just have to see if you can get them right.
Is there a prize?
You get bragging rights that you won on the show.
That's all I could want is to win on the show. Is 2 out of 3 a win, or do I need all 3?
2 out of 3 is a win.
Oh, good.
And
I'm ready.
I saw that you go to FinCon, or you spoke at FinCon in DC. So yeah. I've had a lot of FinConners on the show, so it will be true bragging rights at FinCon.
I'm ready. I'm ready. I intend to wear the button.
I should get buttons made. That is such a great idea, Eric. That's going to be new swag.
There you go. I want to be first.
Okay, let's see.
When you get your buttons made, I pass the trivia. I want to be assuming I pass.
I will. Okay. I'm going to have to make sure I write that down to get buttons made. That is such a great idea. Okay. All right. First question.
Yes.
Which color is the A button on the controller sold with the original Nintendo Entertainment System? So what color is the A button on?
I know the 4 colors to choose from. The original Nintendo, the A was red.
You're right. I didn't even have to read them. That was good. Okay.
I want a button.
We haven't won the game yet.
I played a fair amount of video games. I'm not going to lie. So that was unfair, but I'll take it. Okay. And by played, I mean still play. But that's a whole other story.
All right. Which color replaced light brown M&M candies? Is it A, green, B, red, C, blue, or D, dark brown?
Well, it's either red or blue. Let me think this through. I think the light brown was replaced by the blue M&M.
You are right.
Yes.
2 for 2.
Yes.
All right, last one. What was the first video played on MTV? Is it
Video Killed the Radio Star?
Yes. you got all 3. All right, if I get buttons made, I'm gonna send you one.
Yeah, but 3 out of 3 gets a bigger button.
Yes.
I want the large size button.
The large size button.
How about that for trivia, man?
Yes. Well, I really appreciate you playing and winning and giving me the idea for the buttons and being on the show. Can you tell everybody listening where they can learn more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, to learn more about me and the book and the podcast, you can go to brotmanmedia.com, and it's all there. To learn more about our financial planning firm, you can go to bfgfa.com. That's for BFG Financial Advisors, and there's lots of ways to connect with us. You can also go to financialplanningforall.com, which talks a lot about this financial literacy conversation we just had. There's some resources on our website, some free downloads that are available about how to pay less in income taxes, which everyone seems to like, as well as what financial planning is and what it should involve. And there's some free downloads available to you.
Wonderful. Well, I will be sure to put links to all that in the show notes for everybody. Thank you again, Eric. I appreciate it.
Lacey, it's been fun. Thank you.
Thanks to Eric for coming on the show to talk about financial triage. Thank you to Charles Schwab for providing support to the Military Money Show. To learn more about Charles Schwab and how they can help you reach your financial goals, visit schwab.com today. You can also head over to lacylangford.com to get the show notes and resources. Also, check out lacylangford.com/kickstart kit to get a free plan to kickstart your finances. I appreciate you listening, and I will talk to you next week.